Hello everybody, my name is Cortland Watson. I'm grateful that you are here with us with Life After Loss. I'm excited that we have this opportunity to be able to discuss a little bit more about suicide and being able to overcome that. We're going to go ahead and get started, but before we do, I wanted to address your attention to this disclaimer. Like we've discussed and like you've heard in this Life After Loss conference, there are things that are going to be sensitive. Some of these things may be triggering to you, but what we want you to be able to realize and what we want you to be able to do is to be able to grow, right? So if you start feeling uncomfortable as I'm talking about my information, please take the time. Take the time to be able to take a break, reset, come back to it, skip ahead if that's what you need to do. My intent here is to educate and to empower, not to make you feel uncomfortable. I want to jump here into something that somebody once told me that changed my life, and it was so simple. He said, get out your pen and start taking notes. If you do that today and throughout the presentation, I promise that this is going to be more meaningful. We've seen in learning studies throughout the world that if we take notes and we're actively engaged in whatever was happening, that we're going to start to take in that learning. We're going to start taking in that information a little bit better and more effectively. So my invitation to you is that as I'm going through this information, I'd like for you to be able to do the same. Please get out a pen, a piece of paper, take some notes. If you're above a pen and a paper, please get your phones. Take some notes as we're going through all this. Having those notes is going to be able to help you so that that way you can engage in that last piece of the presentation. Now, to talk a little bit about me, my name is Cortland Watson, like I've already said, and I'm with Ever Onward Coaching. I started a life coaching agency a little while ago. I'm also a practicing school psychologist. Over here on the right side of the screen, you can also see a picture of me and my family. They're everything to me. If I didn't have them, I don't know where I'd be. So to tell you a little bit about that, there's just this little illustration. Now this illustration is a little bit about me. This isn't my illustration, but when I was an early teenager, I had a lot of hard things going on. It was difficult for me to be able to feel like I belonged. It was difficult to feel like anybody wanted me to be around them. And it got to a point where I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with this sense of I didn't belong anywhere. My parents had gone through a divorce. My mother married an alcoholic. We were separated with my stepfather's instability in work. We were in a different home and in a different school every single year. And being the new kid every single year at a new school is not the easiest thing to do. So it got to a point that I started thinking about, oh, well, if I wasn't here, things would be a whole lot easier. My parents, my siblings, the people at school, who all seemed so annoyed with me, they wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. And it got to a point that I had attempted suicide. And as I attempted suicide, the only thing that kept me here was thinking about the real connections that I had made. I thought about those times when me and my father would go and do things. I thought about some of the positive experiences that I had. And those experiences are the experiences that helped me to choose to stay. Now, a similar situation happened again when I got a little bit older, same scenarios, that same feeling of inadequacy, that same feeling of nobody wanted me around. And again, what got me through was that connection. What got me through was that sense of belonging because I had somebody who wanted me to be there. Now, this next slide that I have here, this is a picture of my grandpa Gary. And his wife, Grandma Nancy, at Simone and I's wedding. Now this is the part where I start crying and everybody laughs at me, but I know that you guys won't do that. Grandpa Gary is my father's father. Several years ago, we found out that my grandpa had been diagnosed with cancer, with a late stage melanoma. And in order to go visit him one more time, me and my siblings, we headed out to Nevada to be able to see him. As we got there, we had the opportunity to interact with him. We got to spend some time with him and Grandma Nancy, and it was wonderful. And Grandpa, one day, he asked me to go with him because he wanted to show me something. So he got ready and got in his truck, and then we headed out, and we were going to a part in the Ruby Mountains. And he described it as a part in the mountain where it looked like somebody had taken a saw. Like God had taken a saw to the mountain, and there was just this perfect cut right through the mountain. As we were heading there, we went through and we started going, and we got to a car wash, and my grandpa said, I need to wash the truck before we go, that way it's clean and everything. And we got to the car wash, and we went through the car wash, and he forgot that he had a ton of leaf and yard clippings in the bed of the truck. So as we were going through the yard and going through the car wash, all the yard clippings and leaves and everything was just being spun all around the truck. So not only did we make the truck dirtier, we had to go through the car wash again. So because of that delay, as we were heading toward the mountain, my grandfather said, I don't think that we have enough time to be able to go and see what I want to show you and then be able to make it back before Grandma starts to worry. We made it back to the house. We had the opportunity to give my grandfather a blessing. We took the time to spend our last time with him. And although nobody knew it, we had the time to say goodbye. He started cancer treatment that week, and then the following week he went into a coma, and we lost him the week after. Now I bring that up because we are all connected. We're all here because we've experienced loss. Some of those losses are more traumatic. Some of those losses are more hurtful. But the point of this conference is to be able to find hope and peace in Christ. I know that Grandpa Gary, that his spirit lives on. And if I had the opportunity to talk to him face to face, I'd tell him that I look forward to him showing me that part of the mountain. And I haven't gone yet. I still won't go. I'm waiting for that. Now, everybody in this room, we've all experienced loss. Like I said, it's different for everybody. But I want to take a little bit of time to ask this question. What would you say to them right now if you could? What would you say? Whatever that is, whatever it means, write it down. Use it. Take the chance to be able to write, to be able to think, to be able to memorialize, to think about what it is that you're wanting and that you're missing. I miss my Grandpa Gary. Now, as we move forward, I want to talk a little bit about this presentation, what this presentation is going to be, what it's going to look like, and then also how we're going to move from one step to the next and to the next. Like I said, the point of this presentation is to be able to educate and empower. So how are we going to do that? If you look at this slide in this presentation, you see that we're going to go through different facets. We're going to start by talking about grieving and suicide. We're going to talk then about the research that I've published called Very Young Survivors of Parent Suicide. We'll then jump into a little bit of the case studies that I've had in my profession, and then move into principles of faith, and then empowering you. So like I said earlier, I want you to be able to use that pen, use your tablet, use your phone to be able to take notes. So as we're going through this presentation, and as we have these different slides, these different goals, these different objectives, I want you to take the time to be able to write down those things that you're learning and those things that that are coming to your mind and that the Spirit is going to bring to your mind. Now here's a fun statistic from the CDC. I say fun because we don't realize how prevalent this is. Every year in the United States, there are over 3 million people that die. That's about one person out of every 100. The point in bringing that up is to be able to illustrate that we are not alone. As we go through and we experience loss and we experience tragedy, right? We experience that heartache. So often we start to realize or think or identify that we are the only ones going through this. Now, our experiences, they're all unique, but that does not mean that your experience and my experience, that we need to disconnect from each other. It's the opposite. My experience with Grandpa Gary, it only enables me to be able to experience and relate to what you're feeling. Yes, you may have experienced the suicide of a loved one. Somebody else may have lost their family member in a tragic car accident. But all of us have experienced that tragedy of loss, of heartache, of hardship. And that is a unifying factor. That is going to help us. So as we go through and we talk about this, how prevalent it is that we're going through and experiencing these things, that means that all of us are dealing with or going through these tasks of grief. Now, these are Warden's tasks of grief. Now, Warden came through and he presented these tasks of grief to be able to help us in understanding the process of how a person deals with grief, and also to be able to relate what we're doing in those different stages. The first is to accept. Accept does not mean be okay with. Accept means acknowledging reality. Okay? The next step, process, that is where we start to acknowledge or become okay with the loss. Processing that information, processing that new reality is going to enable us to move into that third step. Adjusting to be able to live our lives in a way that now takes in that new reality. That's what we're looking for. Adjusting our lives to be able to deal with our new reality. And Warden's last step is memorializing. Memorializing is not necessarily creating a statue and putting it in your home. Memorializing is a simple act as what I just had you do. What would you say to that person if they were here in front of you? How do you remember them? Do you celebrate their birthday? Do you think about them? Do you write a journal and sometimes you write to them? Memorializing is simply that idea of being able to remember these individuals. Now, for some of us, those feelings may not be as positive as other people. Memorializing, though, is part of that grieving process. whether or not it's a positive thing, we have to be able to understand that remembering them is part of that process. Now, going through therapy, you may have some different understandings, some different breakthroughs that may help you in that process of memorializing, getting through some of those emotions. But I'm just talking about this general principle right now. But one of the hard things is that as we move forward, we talk about a timeline. When do I accept it? Is it a month? A week? Is it a year? Does processing always have to come right after that? Adjusting, memorializing, when do those come into play? Now, as we are all here because of this Life After Loss conference, I'm just going to project and say that we've all experienced loss. And what we're trying to do here is to be able to understand how I get through this. How do I find hope to be able to get through this? And the reality is, these tasks of grief don't have a timeline. Not only do they not have a timeline, but they change throughout the lifespan. Grandpa Gary was there for when Simone and I got married. He was there when I had my first child. Not for the next 3. He wasn't there when I went through and earned my graduate degree. He wasn't there when I started my career. He wasn't there as I've gone through my faith trials. And every time I hit one of those milestones, it turns into this reality of, I have to accept that Grandpa Gary's not here. I have to process that. I have to adjust. I have to memorialize. There is no one and done when it comes to grieving. Now, as we jump into suicide and we start talking about this different perception, this different category of death, this different category of losing a loved one, we have to talk about some of those statistics as well. It's estimated that there are about 50,000 suicides in the United States alone. Now, majority of those individuals are between the ages of 25 and 54 years old. What's the commonality between people between 25 and 54? Think about that as we move into the next slides. That age range, 25 to 54, why is that meaningful? Now, as we move in and we talk about 50,000 suicides in the United States of America each year, we jump into and say, okay, well, what does that mean? How does that impact us as a society? Every year, with about 50,000 people completing suicide, it's estimated that 140 individuals are impacted by each and every suicide. Cyril did the research to be able to calculate that number. Now, if we multiply 140 people by 50,000, that means that 7 million people in the United States are impacted by suicide every single year. As we jump through that number, right, that 7 million, it's not just saying that 7 million people know somebody that committed suicide. What we're saying is 7 million people have had their lives altered because of the suicide of somebody that they knew. It's not just merely, oh, I knew this person. It's, I'm hurting because this person left. Now, as we talk about those tasks of grief and we overlay that on this principle and on this category of suicide, things start to get complicated. as we talk about different aspects of how we get through those tasks of grief, we start to realize that grieving and suicide, that's a complicated relationship. Access to support is more difficult. We jump to the bottom left. Relationships are altered because of the suicide. There's an unexpected and traumatic relationship with suicide. And then, as I put up there on the screen 3 times, there's a stigma. And so often our healing is impacted because of that stigma that's related to suicide. It's not only, oh, I lost a loved one. It's now, I lost a loved one that committed suicide. Just to be able to talk about that is difficult. And that complicates everything. As we reach out to get support, it's hard to talk about it. As we interact with those around us, it's hard to talk about. Now, I asked you earlier to remember that age range, right? We have this idea and this principle that grieving through that lens of suicide, as it's complicated, we also have in here that majority of those individuals are between the ages of 25 and 54. Now, that commonality, hopefully you made a guess, hopefully you wrote something down. The commonality there is that these are child-rearing years. This is the age range where people start to have children, have grandchildren. They interact and they start talking with their family members, right? They're raising their children, going to sports, doing all these activities, which means that every year, it's estimated that 7,000 to 10,000 children are left behind due to the suicide of a parent. This is a very vulnerable population. Now, initially it was thought that these children who experienced the loss of a parent to suicide, that everything was exactly the same as other children who had experienced the death of a parent. But that's not reality. In 1999, the research started to come forward and started to illustrate that these children, these family members specifically, they're all experiencing suicide in a much different way than how somebody who has experienced the life of, or the loss of a loved one experiences their loss. Now, like I said earlier, this does not mean that people who experience the loss of a loved one to suicide go through harder or more difficult grieving. It means that they experience grieving in a different way. There is no greater or lesser when we talk about grieving. Now, on this slide, it talks about that Cyril in 1999 found that these children, they experience more intense grief. They experience higher senses of anger, higher feelings of shame, and higher levels of anxiety. And that all relates to what we just talked about, that stigma. That stigma that's associated with suicide. So many times when we talk about suicide, we think about that this person completed suicide, they died by suicide, and it's shameful. Why would they do that? How could they do that to us? Those are the questions that are typically asked. And that complicates how we grieve. That complicates how we accept, how we process, how we adjust, and how we memorialize. So with this in mind, that's where my research comes in. I went through and we identified and found 7 adults who lost a father due to suicide before they turned 6 years old. What we did with them was we interviewed them. We empowered them by teaching them and showing them different resources that are available, and then having them share their feedback on what would have been helpful and meaningful to them as they were going through their grieving process in their earlier years. Now, of course, they are still experiencing that grieving, but, for example, hey, Johnny, you just experienced, or when you were a child, you experienced the loss of your father. We're looking at these books here, and we brought these books because we want you to be able to share with us which of these books would have been helpful, which of them would have been meaningful to be able to identify and help a child go through that process. Now, we looked at each of these interviews in one way where we just considered them, and then we looked at these individuals as a group, and we started saying, okay, what can we relate and what can we tie together through all of this? One thing that we specifically targeted was the emotions. Now, these emotions are in this slide in two different ways. First, we have the negative, and then we have the positive. And you'll notice here, there's a whole lot more negative than there is positive. That's part of the grieving. And especially grieving due to suicide. And this isn't specific and isolated to children. This is how everybody who's impacted by suicide feels. They feel negative emotions, and they typically outweigh those positive emotions. Some of those negative emotions that were represented in the interviews were that they felt paralyzed, they felt guilt, anger, shame, confused, they felt disgusted, they felt hatred, sad, they had ambiguous or conflicting feelings. There was resentment, insecurity, depression, and they felt traumatized. And on occasion, there were feelings of hope, faith, and happiness, which is amazing. It's amazing that these children could feel hope and faith and happiness through such a difficult time. Now, I want to talk a little bit about elements that prolonged healing for these children, for these individuals. And this is going to be similar, and we can generalize this information to other groups, right? Adults who are impacted by suicide. Now, some elements that prolong the healing process for these specific individuals. Leaving, missing, separating, and overhearing others. There was a degree of separation between them and their family members, the individuals that they interacted with throughout this process. There was more acting out, more problematic behavior, more declining of appropriate behavior. They felt anger, shame, suffering, paralysis. All these things helped in making that and drawing that grieving process out. And the last one that I really want to emphasize and talk about is waiting to talk, not talking, or having confusion about others' dysregulation. What does that mean? That means that the people around them that were surrounding them, they didn't say anything. They didn't talk to these kids. They just went on living their life. They went on doing what they do. The kids could see that things were different. Why are things different? But there was never an explanation. And that brings forth one of the things that came up through research, is that when kids don't have an explanation, when they don't have an adult to be able to explain things to them and help them in developing and creating their reality, they're going to create their own. Do you see how that could be problematic? Do you see how that could be hurtful? I want to talk a little bit about things that were positive, things that activated healing. Some of those things are listed here: routines, faith, hope, growing and accepting the reality, that first part of a warden's task of grief, talking and overcoming. Now you'll notice that this list is almost the opposite of the list that prolonged healing and prolonged grieving. this specific list goes through and it talks about routines, accepting, talking. Those elements were the elements that were so meaningful and impactful. Now, I'm going to use a couple of these quotes from these individuals. I hope that they do not trigger. I purposefully left out some of the details so that way it's not perceived in that way. But as I do talk about them, this is directly from those individuals. So, what did they actually say? I've presented some of that information about some themes that we were able to identify, but I want to talk a little bit about what specifically they said. Now here, I'm going to quote. It makes me feel like maybe he did that, completed suicide, because of me and because I was born. It took me so long to get over, and my mom did not help with this part. Me hearing how difficult I was as a baby and then my dad committing suicide when I was so young, I was like, oh my gosh, I must have been part of the reason, if not the whole reason, you know? This illustrates that, where if we don't help children in being able to understand reality, then they start to create their own reality, which can only be more hurtful. Because a child, as we help them grow and develop, they start to see more clearly. They become more able to relate and talk about those things. They can identify them more appropriately. Now here's another one that I wanted to share. As soon as I talked about it, I overcame it. It took a little while, but eventually it happened, you know? I never went to counseling until I was 19, and that's when the healing process started to take place, when I started going. Now this is illustrative of what we talked about as well, where the elements that prolonged the healing process, the elements that prolonged that healing process were that confusion, not understanding, not being willing, or not having things explained to them. And those elements that were healing were the communication. That ability to be able to talk and help with processing, help with those warden's task of grief. As we talk about these experiences, there's one big piece that I've overlooked. And not that I've overlooked it intentionally, it's just a part of the research, a part of the study. We didn't get the perspectives of the parents. Now I want you to imagine that you have experienced the loss of, for example, your spouse. You have your children, and they're struggling to be able to grieve. But at the same time, you have to grieve too. How does that work? How can I deal with this coping? How can I deal with this loss? How can I deal with making my kids breakfast? It all comes back to that element of being able to communicate. That element of being able to interact. Being able to say, I need help. I need somebody to come help me with breakfast. Baby, I can't get up right now. I'm having a hard time. How are you feeling? These parents are experiencing an amazing amount of trauma, an amazing amount of depression, anxiety, all those feelings that we've talked about that these children experienced. The parents are experiencing as well, and they have to take care of their children. Now, how do we get to that point? How do we get to that point of being able to say, I'm suffering. Let's also talk about how you're suffering. It comes through what they talked about. being able to develop routines, being able to communicate in such a way that when things happen, we have that relationship built already. So then we can start to realize and start to talk and work through it together. In my life and with my family, there's something that we've done to be able to help with this. And this is one of our family mottos. I'm going to read this. No matter where you are, how you got there, who you're with, why you're there, or what you're doing, you are Watson, and I will always love you. Now, we created this in efforts to be able to create an environment where our children feel like they can always communicate with us. That no matter what, their identity as my child, their identity as a Watson, is more important than everything else. As we create routines, as we create meaningful connection, that's going to help us in being able to address these different issues as they arise. But one of the most difficult things is we have to be able to get there. Trying to deal with a fire right when it starts, after it's full ablaze, is a whole lot harder than trying to deal with it when it's an ember. Children have the capacity to be able to see through our false intentions. When we try to connect when they're going through hardship, that's more difficult. But if we can connect when times are good, when we can connect through all these different experiences in life, we're going to have a better capacity to be able to help them once they experience these losses. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the pairing of what these individuals said was helpful for them. What books they thought would have been helpful as they went through their grieving process. Now, specifically in this graphic, we talk about the description of helpful and unhelpful books. Now, I excluded the unhelpful because I don't want to give time to them. But these ones here were the participants considered to be helpful. Are You Like Me? The Invisible String, Not the End, Samantha Jane's Missing Smile. All of these books are really great books and tools to be able to help through that grieving process. If you don't know how to communicate about these things, here's a way. Now, here's what the participants said as they went through and under that column of processing codes. It was approving, it was guiding, helpful, easing, gentle, understanding, connecting. All these ways and all these words help us understand that this book was designed to be able to help us through this process, not to isolate us anymore. Now, just an overview. Through my research, we were able to see, and the research of our team, we're able to see that children can understand the intent that adults have as they're working with them. If we don't help them in being able to understand what reality is, they're going to develop their own reality. On that left side, we also see that grieving children, they do it just as thoroughly as adults do. They go through all of those processes. And they also understand what they need. They may not be able to articulate it well, but they will show us what they need. And then as we look at the participants, we see that there's an element of things that were difficult for them. The mother and the family was disconnected with them. The family didn't want to talk about it. They wanted some clarity. And then with time, they were able to heal through connection as they got that communication that they were wanting. Now, with the time that we have left, I wanted to talk a little bit about case studies and then move into that empowerment piece. So one of these, I had a friend that was on my research team. And as we were working through this process of being able to work on this, We started telling our stories and our backgrounds. And I found out that she had actually experienced the loss of her mother to suicide. Now, they were living in an apartment complex that was very tall. And she was coming home one day. And she saw some of the ambulance and some of her family members and friends outside. And they were all standing outside the building. And she asked what was going on. And she never got an explanation. They got back up into the apartment. And they realized that Mom wasn't coming home. And they never got an answer. She got to the end of high school. And somebody came up to her and asked, "How are you doing since your mom committed suicide?" And she broke down. There was a gap of about 10 years between when her mother died and when she was first asked about how she was doing. That moment was liberating. Another example in reference to this picture on the top left. There's an element of being able to understand where we are. I was working with a first grader. He was very young, 7, 8 years old. And his father had completed suicide. As he was working through everything, we did a board game. We created our own board game and we started developing obstacles. Here's the end, and here are some obstacles. And some of the obstacles that he brought up in his life was that it was very difficult to see that his mom was dating. But at the same time, his end goal was to have a father. So not only was it difficult to be able to see his mom dating, but it was actually what he wanted. How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? As a child of 7, 8 years old, I hate that my mom is doing exactly what I need. But I need it. I need a father. And that's that element of being able to communicate. Now in a couple of minutes, you being able to pause this recording or being able to work through it, write down some of the obstacles that are in your way of being able to cope and grieve. Take the time to be able to do that. And then address them. Address them and talk to other people to be able to find out, okay, how do I get through this? And you'll find that there's a healing element through that. Now I want to turn into our faith. In the scriptures it says, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths." There's this element of come unto me, come unto Christ, and I will help you. Okay, well, I'm here now. What are we going to do? In Mosiah, he says, "Yea, and are willing to mourn with those that mourn." In Matthew, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." Too often we sit here and we think, I want God to embrace me. I want Jesus Christ to heal me. Without acknowledging that he is sending people to us all the time. People that we can connect with. People whose hands we can touch, whose hugs we can feel. Use them. Now today, we believe that we have a prophet. We believe that President Nelson is the prophet of God. How has he helped us to be able to deal with this grieving process? How has Christ revealed through the prophet how we can get through this? How does he help us? I want to direct your attention to the Gospel Library app. go into that Gospel Library app, go to that main library, select the Life Help, and then in that realm, in that category, there are a bunch of resources to be able to help us in that process. God has not left us alone. He's provided us with resources to deal with grief, death, suicide, addiction, and the list goes on under that category. And the other element is ministering. He's created a way for us to be able to communicate and talk about everything that we're going through. But not only to deal with what we're going through, but He's created a way for us to be able to interact with each other prior to these things happening. In the research, I talked about how children, they can see through the facade. They can see it. You're only here because my father passed away. Where were you before he passed away? That's what ministering is. Connecting. Connecting at a level so that when we get to that point of needing support, there's somebody there who's already developed a relationship with us that we feel comfortable enough to say, I'm struggling. I need somebody to make my kids breakfast. If you want hope, here's where you will find it. Through meaningful connection with people around you. One of the ways to best be able to do that is to be able to talk. Talking and communicating is how we get through that. That's where we find hope. That's what we need. We need people that are willing to empathize, to take their experiences and to relate to other people. Grandpa Gary died, and I still deal with that every day. I don't know what your experience is like, but I know that you are experiencing a lot of pain. I've been there, and I'm here with you now, feeling those feelings. That's an effective minister. And as we go through that, one of the common stigmas or the common beliefs about suicide is that talking about suicide is not beneficial. But it is not true. Talking about suicide is extremely helpful, and it creates an opportunity to connect with those people that we're interacting with. And it is as simple as asking the question, are you thinking about committing suicide? James, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And then listen. If they say yes, listen to them. Help them to find the resources that they need. Connect them with your bishop. Connect them with a mental health provider. Let them know that they're not alone. And if they do confide in you, acknowledge it. Acknowledge that you're grateful. That the relationship is such that they can share these deep and intimate feelings. That they have the capacity to trust you. And when you're in that realm of being able to receive somebody's trust, when you are trustworthy, that's where the connection is meaningful. That's where the connection is powerful. And that's where we're going to be able to help people. But we have to break through that stigma. We have to be willing to talk about hard things. Now, I talked about empowering. I hope that through this presentation you have been able to connect some of these elements of healing, of suicide awareness, an understanding of that stigma and how it cripples us from being able to communicate and being able to connect. It is my prayer that you're going to be able to take that information and do something meaningful with it. There's a degree of humility that comes with knowledge, specifically knowledge about grieving and suicide. We have to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to ask for help and humble enough to give help when it's needed. Now, one of the main ways that we can combat that suicide and combat that stigma is being actively engaged. It's my invitation to you as we close that you take a selfie, you take a screenshot of you watching this recording, you do something, and you take it and you post on social media or in another format. Write a letter, share what you've learned with somebody else. And it's my invitation that as you use that and as you share it with social media, that you can create conversations that are going to be able to help people talk about this issue a little bit more. And with every person that's able to do that, the stigma surrounding suicide is going to be diminished. And as you do it, use these hashtags: life after loss, suicide prevention, suicide stigma, fostering resilience together, to be able to create this community that as we go through this, we can do it together. And that there's a brighter side at the end. That as we go through this, there is hope in Christ. He showed us that we can do that through meaningful connection. Again, my name is Cortland Watson. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking notes. Thank you for choosing to break down the walls and the barriers of suicide, and for being willing and being humble enough to connect with those that have been impacted by suicide.